The Soviet partisans were members of a resistance movement that fought a guerrilla war against the Axis occupation of the Soviet Union during World War II. The movement was coordinated and controlled by the Soviet government and modeled on that of the Red Army. The primary objective of the guerrilla warfare waged by the Soviet partisan units was the disruption of the Eastern Front's German rear, especially road and rail communications. There were also regular military formations, also called partisans, that were used to conduct long-range reconnaissance patrol missions behind Axis lines from bases within Soviet-held territory. Formation of anti-German Soviet resistance. The program of the Partisan War was outlined in the Soviet People's Commissaries' Council and Communist Party directives issued on July 29, 1941, and in following documents. Partisan detachments and diversionist groups were to be formed in the German-occupied territories, road and telecommunications disrupted, German personnel killed, and valuable resources destroyed. Joseph Stalin, in his radio speech on August 3, 1941, iterated these commands and directives to the people. Adolf Hitler, when referring to that speech on August 16, pointed out that the declared partisan war in the German rear had its advantages, providing the excuse for destroying anything that opposes the Germans. The first partisan detachments, consisting of Red Army personnel and local inhabitants, and commanded by Red Army officers or local Communist Party activists, were formed in the first days of the war, including the Starosilski detachment of Major Dorodnik in the Zhebinka district and the Pinsk detachment of Vasily Korsh on June 26, 1941. The first awards of the Hero of the Soviet Union Order occurred on August 6, 1941. In 1941, the core of the social base of the partisan movement were the remains of Red Army units destroyed in the first phases of Operation Barbarossa, personnel of destruction battalions, and the local Communist Party and Komsomol activists. The most common unit of the period was the detachment. The seed partisan detachments, diversionist and organizational groups were formed and parachuted into German-occupied territories in the summer of 1941. Urban underground groups were formed as a force complementing the activities of partisan units, operating in rural areas. The network of underground structures was actively developed on German-occupied territories to control activities, and it received a steady influx of specially chosen party activists. By the end of 1941, more than 2,000 partisan detachments operated in German-occupied territories. However, the activity of partisan forces were not centrally coordinated and supplied until spring of 1942. In order to coordinate partisan operations, the central headquarters of the partisan movement under Statka, headed by Panteleimon Ponomarenko and initially commanded by top Politburo member Klement Voroshilov, was organized on May 30, 1942. The staff had its liaison networks in the military councils of the fronts and armies. The territorial staffs were subsequently created, dealing with the partisan movement in the respective Soviet republics and in the occupied provinces of the Russian SFSR. Initially, in Ukraine and Belarus, some of the local population were supportive of the German occupation that they hoped would bring about the end of Stalinist rule. Later, the NKVD, SMERSH and GRU began training a special group of future partisans in the rear and dropping them into occupied territories. Candidates were chosen from among volunteers from the regular Red Army, the NKVD internal troops, and Soviet sportsmen. Behind the German front line, the groups were to organize and guide the local, self-established partisan units. Radio operators and intelligence-gathering officers were essential members of each group since amateur fighters could not be trusted with these tasks. Some commanders of these special units, such as Dmitry Nikolaevich Medvedev, later became well-known partisan leaders.